I was 13 when my world was ripped apart, and I've spent the last 65 years piecing myself back together. To most folks here in LeClaire, I'm just Jane Howard, the quiet old widow who tends her front garden and reads by the river every Sunday. They see my soft gray curls, my worn hands, and maybe think I've lived a gentle life. But behind these weathered eyes lives a truth too painful to tell at Sunday service, a truth that's been stitched into my bones since the summer of 1960. Back then, I shared a room with my older sister, Charlotte. She was 17, beautiful like the girls in Sears catalogs, and knew how to talk so sweet it made boys forget their names. Everyone loved Charlotte. I did too, maybe a little too much. Our daddy worked at the mill, and Mama cleaned houses across the river in Moline. We didn't have much, but Mama always said, "There's dignity in keeping things clean and quiet." So that's what I did. I stayed quiet. I kept the house neat. I tried not to want too much. But then Derek Lawson started coming around. Charlotte met him at the diner where she waitressed on weekends. He was tall, cocky, with slicked back hair and a voice like the men in the radio serials. Derek wasn't from LeClaire. He drove in from Bettendorf, which already made him feel dangerous. Mama didn't like him much, said he was too smooth. But Daddy grunted. At least he's working, and that was the end of it. At first, Derek barely noticed me, or so I thought. He'd whistle through the back door, bring Charlotte cherry cokes, and joke loud enough that even the neighbors smiled. I remember feeling small when he was around, like the air in the room got tight, and I had to shrink just to breathe. But I never said a word. I told myself I was just being silly. Then one afternoon, I caught him looking at me. I was folding laundry on the back porch. When I felt eyes on my legs, he lingered too long, smiled too slowly. Something about it made my stomach turn cold. I rushed inside, cheeks hot with shame, but said nothing. After all, he was Charlotte's boyfriend, and she was my sister, my best friend, my safe place. I didn't know then that Derek wasn't just a smooth talker. He was a hunter, and I was in his sights. Looking back now, I can still remember the sound of that summer, the cicadas, the buzz of the box fan in our window, and the creak of the screen door that night. It all began. Mama was working late. Daddy was out playing cards. Charlotte had gone to the lake with friends. I was alone, or so I thought. Derek came by, said he forgot something Charlotte had borrowed. I should have slammed the door. I should have run. But I was 13. I was polite. I let him in. I didn't know he'd brought friends. The rest of that night plays in broken flashes. The way the kitchen tiles pressed against my cheek, the laughter, the terror, the awful silence after. I never told anyone, not then, not right away. Because when I tried to, the person I loved most didn't believe me. Charlotte didn't just call me a liar. She blamed me, said I'd been flirting, that I liked the attention. She said Derek told her I'd come on to him, and she believed it. My own sister. My heart split in two that day, more than it had the night before. And in that moment, I learned what it meant to carry pain no one can see. I'm telling this now, not for pity, but because someone, somewhere, might be living with the same silence I did. And I want them to know you are not alone. But before I found the courage to say that out loud, I had to survive the years that came next, before everything changed. My childhood was quiet, ordinary in a small town kind of way. We didn't have money for vacations or new clothes, but we had 3 good meals most days, a roof that didn't leak, and parents who worked hard and expected us to do the same. My father, Clyde Howard, was a man of few words. He worked double shifts at the sawmill and came home coated in sawdust and silence. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't gentle either. He believed in discipline, chores, and keeping one's mouth shut. My mother, Irene, was stricter about manners than emotions. She said, "Feelings are fine, but don't let them spill out everywhere like soup on a Sunday dress." So I kept mine tucked in tight. Charlotte, on the other hand, had always been the spark in our house. She was bold where I was meek, pretty where I was plain. Mama used to joke that Charlotte had been born with sunlight in her veins, and I'd gotten the shadows. It was just a saying, I know, but some part of me took it to heart. She got the first pick of everything, bed by the window, the bigger slice of pie, Daddy's rare smiles. She didn't ask for it, it just happened. Folks at church doted on her. Teachers forgave her missed homework because she had such potential. And boys followed her like bees to a flower. I didn't resent her, not at first. I adored her. She let me wear her old dresses and once snuck me a lipstick from Woolworth's, whispering, "Don't tell Mama. Just wear it when you're alone and want to feel special." That was Charlotte. Generous in moments, careless in others. But as I reached 12 and 13, something started to shift. My body began to change curves I didn't understand, stares I didn't know how to handle. And for the first time, I noticed Charlotte watching me with a different kind of glance. Not just sisterly concern, something closer to rivalry. I remember one particular afternoon. Charlotte and I were helping Mama hang laundry in the backyard. I bent over to grab the basket, and Charlotte hissed, "Pull your dress down, Jane. You're not a little girl anymore." Her voice was sharp. Mama didn't hear it, but I did. It stung. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror, examining myself. My face was still round, my freckles still too many, but my figure was catching up to hers. For the first time, I wondered if maybe I could be noticed too. But I didn't want attention like hers. I wanted safety, belonging. Derek Lawson shattered all of that. When he showed up at our front porch with that confident smile and shiny car, Charlotte beamed like a light had been switched on inside her. Derek was older 20, maybe 21. He worked part-time at his cousin's mechanic shop and claimed he was saving to open a garage of his own. Charlotte fell hard and fast, and honestly, I didn't blame her. He made her feel grown up and wanted. In a town like LeClaire, where dreams often rot on porches and promises die in cornfields, a man like Derek seemed like a ticket out. At first, I only saw him from a distance. He'd honk the horn. Charlotte would run out giggling, and I'd return to my homework or peeling potatoes for supper. But eventually, he started coming inside having supper with us, helping Daddy fix the back steps, even tossing a ball to me in the yard while Charlotte put on lipstick. That's when things began to feel wrong. Derek's compliments weren't loud, but they were pointed. "You're growing up fast, Jane," he'd say with a smirk. Or, "That's a nice color on you," when I wore one of Charlotte's hand-me-down skirts. I didn't know how to respond. I'd turn away, blush, or mumble a thanks. Inside, I felt something between shame and dread. One evening, I was setting the table while Mama finished her meatloaf. Derek came in the kitchen alone and leaned over my shoulder. His voice was low. "Bet you get a lot of attention at school now." Huh, I froze. I could feel his breath on my neck. Then Charlotte walked in, and he snapped upright, all smiles and jokes again. I wanted to tell her. I tried, but every time I opened my mouth, something choked me. She loved him so much. She talked about marriage, moving to Des Moines, getting away from small-town life. I couldn't be the reason her dreams crumbled, so I stayed quiet. But something in Charlotte noticed. Maybe it was the way Derek looked at me when he thought no one saw. Maybe it was how I flinched when he touched my shoulder in front of her. Whatever it was, it festered. She started nitpicking my clothes, my posture, the way I talked. One Sunday, she called me a clingy little girl in front of our cousins. Mama told her to apologize, but she just rolled her eyes. That was the first crack in our sisterhood. Still, I loved her. I thought if I could just stay small enough, quiet enough, everything would be okay. I believed she would protect me if it ever came down to it. I was wrong. That summer, I didn't just lose my innocence. I lost my sister. And the months leading up to that night were like watching a storm roll in across the river. You could see it coming, but you had no idea how hard it would hit until it did. The summer of 1960 was hot and heavy, the kind of heat that stuck to your skin and made your thoughts feel slow. In LeClaire, when the river air turned sour and the cicadas screamed through the evenings, it meant something was about to shift. I just didn't know that something was me. Charlotte had started staying out later. Derek would pick her up after dinner, and they'd be gone till nearly midnight. Mama didn't like it, but Daddy said, "She's got to grow up sometime." I didn't go out much. I helped Mama with the dishes, played records, read library books, and tried to ignore the way Derek's name made my stomach twist. One Thursday night in late July, Charlotte flew through the door all giddy, dropped her purse on the couch, and leaned against the kitchen door frame with a grin on her face. "Derek wants to bring his friends over Saturday," she announced, "just for a bit. They'll hang out on the porch." Nothing wild. Mama frowned. "What for?" Charlotte rolled her eyes. "He says they've been working all week, and he promised them a place to relax. It's just Mike and Troy. I'll keep 'em outside." Daddy shrugged. "As long as they don't make a mess." And that was that. No one asked me how I felt about it. Saturday came, hot and buzzing. Charlotte spent hours curling her hair and spraying on too much perfume. The porch was cleaned and rearranged. Mama and Daddy left early for a church social in Davenport, trusting Charlotte, trusting all of us to be responsible by sundown. I was alone in the house, lying on the couch in a cotton dress with my nose in a book. I heard the truck pull up and 3 voices laughing, boots on gravel, then the creak of the porch steps. I stayed still, hoping they'd forget I existed. Charlotte shouted from the porch, "Jane, come out here. Derek brought you a soda." My heart dropped. I tried to pretend I hadn't heard. But then the screen door swung open, and Derek stepped inside. "There you are," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "You're always hiding." He handed me the bottle, cold and sweating in the summer heat. I took it with trembling fingers. "Come sit with us," he said, like it wasn't a suggestion. It's just friendly company. I followed him out, legs stiff, every step slow and hesitant. Charlotte was laughing with Mike and Troy, perched on the railing like it was her throne. Her eyes landed on me and narrowed slightly. "You could at least brush your hair," she muttered. But Derek just chuckled and patted the spot beside him on the porch swing. We sat. I barely sipped the soda. Their jokes bounced around like rubber balls, crude and careless. I kept my eyes on the floorboards, praying time would pass faster. At one point, Troy reached over and tugged gently on the end of my braid. "You're the quiet one." "Huh, she's always like that," Charlotte said quickly. "Thinks she's too good for people." I looked at her, really looked. There was something sharp behind her smile, something bitter. She wasn't protecting me. She was offering me up. Eventually, Charlotte stood up. I'm getting some more drinks. Be right back. When she stepped inside, Derek leaned toward me. His arm rested behind me on the swing, just too close. Mike and Troy fell silent, and I felt their eyes on me, watching, waiting. You ever had a boyfriend? Jane Derek asked. His voice was low, like a whisper meant only for me. I shook my head. He smiled wider. You're gonna, someday. I stood quickly. I should help Charlotte. I turned to go, but Troy blocked the doorway. She's fine, he said, grinning. Why don't you keep us company a while? Something in my chest screamed. I moved again, trying to push past him, but Mike was already behind me. The world tilted. My mouth opened, but no sound came. The rest happened in fragments grabbing hands, the sting of the porch boards against my back, a sharp cry swallowed by the night. I remember Charlotte's silhouette at the doorway, just standing there, watching, then turning away. That was the worst part. It wasn't just the pain. It wasn't the blood, the choking on fear, or the weight of 3 grown men crushing every part of me. It was knowing my sister saw and left me there when it was over. They laughed. Derek wiped his hands on his jeans and told me to clean myself up. Mike muttered something about it being her fault for being so quiet, and Troy just lit a cigarette like nothing had happened. I stayed there, broken, until the sound of tires on gravel told me they were gone. I crawled inside, legs barely working, and locked myself in the bathroom. My dress was torn. My skin was bruised. I threw up twice and sat in the tub with the water running for what felt like hours. But nothing could wash away what they did. Charlotte never came in. She never knocked. She didn't ask if I was okay. The next morning, I told her. I stood in the kitchen, trembling, my voice hoarse from screaming into the silence the night before. I told her everything. She didn't cry. She didn't hug me. She slapped me across the face. You're lying, she hissed. You think I don't see how you look at Derek. You flirted. You always wanted what I had. I stumbled back, shocked. My cheek burned. My chest caved in. You're just jealous. She spat. Don't ruin my life because you're desperate for attention. And then she left. Just like that. I didn't know how long I stood there, alone in that kitchen. But from that moment on, I knew something had died between us. The bond we'd shared, the trust I'd clung to, the hope that blood meant protection. It was all gone, and all I had left was silence. The morning after felt unreal, like I was trapped inside someone else's life. I remember the sunlight pouring through the kitchen window, lighting up the dust in the air. I remember the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. My body ached in places I didn't have words for. My skin burned where they'd touched me, and my mind wouldn't stop replaying the night, each sound, each breath, each cruel laugh like barbed wire wrapped around my heart. I thought, for a moment, I could tell Mama. She'd always been strict, yes, but she was a mother. She had to care, had to believe me. I imagined her arms around me, her voice steady and strong, promising me it wasn't my fault. But Charlotte had gotten to her first. When Mama came in from the porch, she was stiff, her lips pressed tight, her eyes cold. She didn't greet me, didn't ask how I slept. She just poured herself coffee and muttered, "There's nothing uglier than a jealous girl spreading lies." My stomach dropped. Charlotte came downstairs a few minutes later, dressed and radiant, like she'd slept on clouds while I lay broken a room away. She gave me a quick glance, nothing more, no regret, No shame, just dismissal. Mama looked between us and said, "Charlotte told me what you said. I'm disappointed in you. Jane." I didn't lie. I whispered. Charlotte let out a sharp laugh. She's always had a wild imagination. "Mama, I've seen the way she stares at Derek. It's pathetic." "Enough," Mama snapped. "Jane, you will not ruin your sister's name because of some childish crush. Do you hear me?" I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. That day, I learned silence wasn't always a choice. Sometimes it's survival. When Daddy came home, I prayed that maybe he'd see through the lies. But Mama pulled him aside before I could say a word. He came out of the bedroom looking tired and worn. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "She's acting out," Mama said. "Maybe it's time we sent her to stay with Aunt Doreen for a while. Get her head straight." Aunt Doreen lived in Keokuk 3 hours away. She was stern and distant, a woman who believed emotions were weaknesses and teenage girls were mostly trouble. I hadn't seen her in years. I begged. I cried. I told them again, one last time, what Derek and his friends had done. I even described the porch, the things they said, the smell of his breath. Daddy's face turned red, not from anger at them, but at me. "You think I'm going to sit here and listen to you ruin your sister's life?" He growled. "That boy was polite. Brought me tools last week. You're just trying to break this family apart." He raised his hand not to hit me, but to point. "Straight to the front door. Pack your things. You're going." That night, I sat in my bedroom and folded my clothes into a suitcase, still stained with blood I couldn't scrub out. Charlotte watched from the hallway, arms crossed. "You think this is hard?" she said. "You made your bed, Jane." I looked at her, searching for some flicker of the sister I'd once known, but she was gone. Or maybe she'd never been real to begin with. When the bus pulled out of LeClaire the next morning, I stared at the window as the streets blurred by each building, each corner filled with memories I no longer trusted. I felt hollow, unanchored, like I'd been cast out of the only life I knew for telling the truth. Keokuk was gray and cold, even in summer. Aunt Doreen met me at the station wearing a long coat and a look of irritation. "Let's be clear," she said, before I'd even stepped off the bus. "I don't put up with drama. You will help with chores, stay out of trouble, and keep your mouth shut." "Understand," I nodded. What else could I do for the next 6 months? I lived in that house like a ghost. I didn't speak unless spoken to. I scrubbed floors, ironed linens, and kept to myself. I didn't go to school. Mama said I was too unstable and needed time to mature. Aunt Doreen agreed. But inside me, something had started to harden. Not anger, not yet. Just a quiet wall, a place to hide. At night, I'd lie awake and replay it all. Derek's smile, Charlotte's betrayal, the way Mama turned away. I stopped crying. The tears dried up like a riverbed left to bake in the sun. I began to believe maybe it was my fault. Maybe I had brought it on myself. Maybe I did ruin everything. That's what happens when no one believes you. You start to doubt the truth. You start to wish it had all been a dream because a nightmare that's only in your head is easier than living with what's real. But somewhere deep down, beneath all that shame and silence, a small flame survived, a whisper inside me that said, "You are still here. You are still you." And one day, that whisper would grow loud enough to fight back. The months in Keokuk turned into a year, then another. No one back home in LeClaire came looking for me, not even Charlotte, not a letter, not a call. It was like I'd been erased from the Howard family history, swept under the rug like dust no one wanted to deal with. I was 15 by then, and though the bruises had faded, the damage inside me grew heavier. Aunt Doreen never asked what happened. She simply assumed I was a rebellious girl being punished, and I didn't have the strength to correct her. Every morning, I woke up early to clean the kitchen, mop the steps, fold laundry, and tend to her garden, and every night, I lay on that narrow cot in the spare room, too exhausted to cry and too numb to dream. But the worst part wasn't the chores or the silence. It was the voice in my head. You ruined everything. You tempted him. Your sister was right to hate you. You're not worth believing. That voice lived in me like a parasite, feeding on what little confidence I had left. I stopped speaking in full sentences. I stopped brushing my hair. I didn't even look at myself in the mirror anymore. One afternoon, I was helping Aunt Doreen wash the windows when I collapsed. No warning, just a sudden blackout. When I woke up, I was on the couch with a wet cloth on my head and Aunt Doreen pacing the room. You haven't been eating, have you? She said, frowning. Your skin and bones. She took me to see a local doctor, Dr. Samuel Klein. He was older, with kind eyes and a quiet voice. After a short exam, he asked Aunt Doreen to wait outside. Then he turned to me and said, gently, Jane, I need to ask you something, and I promise, nothing you say will leave this room unless you want it to. I froze. He hesitated, then added, your body shows signs of trauma. Has someone ever hurt you? I stared at the floor, trying to will myself to speak, but the words stayed stuck behind a wall I didn't know how to climb. After a long silence, I whispered. They didn't believe me. Dr. Klein didn't press. He simply nodded, wrote something on a notepad, and said, you're not crazy. What you're feeling is real, but you don't have to carry it alone forever. It was the first time in nearly 2 years someone had looked at me not through me and said something kind. Still, I went home that day and buried myself even deeper. One evening that fall, I found an old photo of Charlotte and me tucked inside a box in Aunt Doreen's basement. We were sitting on the front porch back home, holding hands, both wearing matching gingham dresses. I must have been about 8, Charlotte 11. I stared at it for hours, my fingers tracing the edges. I missed her. God help me. I missed her so much, it made my chest ache. I wanted to believe she regretted it, that she wished she could take it back. But some part of me knew she didn't. She had chosen Derek over me, over the truth. And no matter how many nights I prayed for things to be different, nothing changed. At 16, I tried to go back to school, but the other students whispered too much, and the teachers looked at me like I was damaged goods. One of the boys, Jason Carroll, called me Crazy Jane in front of the lunch line, and everyone laughed. I dropped out that day. I told Aunt Doreen I wanted to get a job. She didn't argue. She was tired of housing me, though she never said it out loud. I started working at a laundromat, folding sheets, cleaning up messes no one else wanted to touch. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet and safe. No men leering, no girls whispering, just the steady rhythm of machines humming like lullabies. But safety doesn't equal healing. There were nights I'd wake up screaming, nights I'd bite my fist to keep the noise from waking the neighbors. I'd dream of Derek's voice, of Charlotte's betrayal, of Mama's cold stare. I hated them. I hated myself for still loving them. Once, I cut off all my hair with a pair of dull kitchen scissors, convinced it would make the memories disappear. It didn't. I looked in the mirror afterward and didn't recognize the girl staring back. By the time I turned 17, I'd become a shell, quiet, thin, tired. One rainy afternoon, while waiting for my shift to end, I watched a mother come in with her little girl. The girl laughed as she climbed into a rolling cart and made a game of pushing herself across the floor. Her mother scolded her gently, then knelt to kiss her forehead. It was such a small thing, but it broke me. I went into the bathroom and sobbed until my knees gave out. That night, something shifted. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. I didn't want to die, not really, but I couldn't bear to keep existing, like I didn't matter. So I did something bold. I wrote a letter, not to Charlotte, not to my parents, to myself. Just a few lines. Jane, you are still here. You did not deserve what happened. You matter. You are worth saving. I folded it and placed it under my pillow. I read it every night for weeks. It wasn't a miracle. It didn't erase the past, but it was the first time I reached out for something resembling hope. That letter saved my life. I was 18 when I met Mrs. Evelyn Grant, the woman who would, in many ways, become the mother I never truly had. It was a Tuesday, late spring. The laundromat had flooded the day before after a pipe burst, and my boss, gruff old Mr. Harlan, told me to take the rest of the week off. I wandered through town, unsure what to do with myself. I didn't have friends to call or places to be. The idea of going back to Aunt Doreen's house with its silence and sighs felt like returning to a cave that had already swallowed too much of me. So I walked. Keokuk wasn't a big city, but it had a few old buildings the locals never seemed to visit. One of them was the Women's Civic Center. I'd passed it a dozen times, but never gone in. On that particular day, the front door was open and a hand-painted sign hung by the gate, free writing class for young women, Tuesdays at 2. No experience needed. I didn't know what pulled me in. Maybe it was the no experience part. Maybe it was the part of me still clutching that letter I wrote to myself. Whatever it was, I stepped inside. The room smelled of paper and old coffee. There were only 4 or 5 other girls there, all older than me. Some were mothers. One was clearly pregnant. They looked tired, but not broken. They glanced up when I walked in, but no one stared. At the front of the room stood a woman in her 60s, tall and thin, with silver hair pinned back in a twist, and glasses that made her look both strict and kind at the same time. She wore a cardigan with tiny bluebirds embroidered across the collar and smiled when she saw me. "You must be Jane," she said, like she already knew me. I hesitated. "How did you?" She winked. "I didn't, but you look like a Jane." I sat down, unsure of myself, and she handed me a worn notebook and a pencil. "We don't worry about grammar or spelling in here," she said. "We just tell the truth. I hadn't written anything since I dropped out of school." My fingers trembled as I pressed the pencil to the page. For a long moment, I just stared. But then Evelyn began reading a piece aloud, something she'd written about her mother dying when she was 9. Her voice cracked halfway through, but she didn't stop. Something inside me cracked too. That day, I wrote about the porch swing. Not the assault. Not yet. Just that porch swing. The way it creaked in the heat. The way it used to feel safe before it didn't. It was only a paragraph. But when I looked up, Evelyn nodded as if she could see right through the paper into my heart. "You have a writer's soul," she said softly. I kept coming back, week after week. She never asked about my past, but she always left space for it. Sometimes she'd give me prompts. Write about a time you were brave, or describe a sound you wish you could forget. And slowly, I wrote my way out of the silence. One day, about 3 months in, I stayed after class to help her gather books. The other girls had gone. Evelyn sat beside me and asked, "Jane, has anyone ever told you they were proud of you?" I froze. I shook my head. "Well," she said, "I am." I burst into tears. It wasn't the kind of sobbing I'd done in secret, in bathrooms or under blankets. This was different. It was as if all the locked doors inside me had finally flung open, and the truth came spilling out. She held my hand while I told her about Derek, about Mike and Troy, about Charlotte standing at the doorway and choosing not to help me, about Mama and Daddy and that cold ride to Keokuk. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch. When I was done, she handed me a tissue and said, "That never should have happened to you. But I'm so damn proud that you survived." It was the first time anyone said that word survived, and it wrapped around me like a quilt I didn't know I needed. Evelyn helped me more than she probably realized. She introduced me to a counselor at a local shelter who specialized in trauma. She wrote me a letter of recommendation for a part-time job at the library. She even helped me enroll in GED classes. At the library, surrounded by dusty shelves and quiet corners, I found a kind of peace. I liked the order of it. The way books held so many broken pieces of people and yet still made something whole. At 20, I moved into a shared apartment with another girl from the writing group. It was tiny and drafty, but it was mine. I bought my own dishes, my own pillow. I painted one wall pale yellow and hung a postcard of the Mississippi River above my bed. Charlotte had once told me I'd never make it on my own. Every paycheck, every meal I cooked for myself, every night I slept without fear, proved her wrong. I didn't speak to my family for years, and I didn't miss them, not in the way I thought I would. I missed who I believed they were, not who they really turned out to be. Mrs. Evelyn Grant passed away when I was 25. I was at her side. She called me her brightest student and left me a stack of letters and one worn-out notebook that said, in her shaky handwriting, "Jane, your story is not over. Keep writing." And I did. I stayed away from LeClaire for over 30 years. I never intended to go back, not even to visit. That town held too many ghosts, too many echoes of who I used to be and who they tried to make me. But life has a strange way of circling back. Sometimes it starts with something as simple as a letter in the mail. I was 52, working full-time at the public library in Keokuk and teaching a Saturday writing class for teenage girls when I got it. A short envelope, no return address, but the handwriting stopped my breath. It was Charlotte's. Inside was a single note. "Jane, if you're still alive, I need to see you. I'm sick, and I'm sorry. Please, come home. See." I stared at that note for a long time. My hands trembled. My first instinct was to burn it, to let the past stay buried. But something in her words, however brief, felt different. A flicker of truth, maybe, or regret. I waited 2 weeks. Then I packed a small bag, took a personal day from the library, and boarded a bus bound for LeClaire. The town hadn't changed much. The same feed store stood on the corner of Main. The old soda fountain was now a souvenir shop, but the streets were narrower than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown too wide for them in spirit. Charlotte was living in a rundown duplex on the edge of town, not far from where we grew up. I stood on the porch for a good 5 minutes before I knocked. She opened the door slowly. Thinner than I remembered. Hair, mostly gray. Oxygen tank by the door. She looked at me like I was a ghost. "Jane," she said, barely above a whisper. I nodded. I came. She let me in without a word. We sat across from each other in her tiny living room. The air was thick with old cigarette smoke and silence. I saw framed pictures of a life I'd missed her wedding, children, grandkids I'd never met. Finally, she spoke. "I know what I did," she said. "I knew back then, too." I didn't respond. I let her carry the weight. "I was jealous of you," she continued, her voice cracking. "Not because of Derek, but because you had this light. People trusted you. You were good. And I didn't know how to be anything but admired." I stared at her. "You let them hurt me." Tears rolled down her cheeks. I was scared to lose him. She said, "I thought, if I admitted the truth, it would ruin everything I thought I wanted. You ruined me instead." She nodded. "I know." Silence again. Then I asked the question that had haunted me for decades. "Why didn't you stop them?" Charlotte shook her head slowly. I froze. I saw it. I opened the door, and I froze. And afterward, I hated you, because hating you was easier than hating myself. She reached for my hand. I pulled it back. "I'm not here for closure," I said quietly. "I just came because I needed to see if you were still human." She nodded again. "Broken now. I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said, "because I don't have it to give." She didn't argue. We sat there until her breathing grew labored. I stood up to leave. At the door, I turned to her. "I survived. You should know that." Charlotte closed her eyes. "I'm glad." I left without hugging her, but I also didn't slam the door. That night, I stayed in a small inn on the river. I walked to the bridge we used to cross as kids and watched the Mississippi move slow and steady under the moonlight. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But what I felt instead was something quieter. Not peace, not exactly, but release, as if finally. The last chain tying me to that porch swing had rusted through. The next morning, I stopped by the house where we grew up. It was boarded up now, a for sale sign crooked in the yard. I stood in front of it for a long time, letting every memory rise and pass, like waves that no longer knocked me off my feet. Then I got on the bus and went home. Not to LeClaire, to Keokuk, to my real home, the one I built, word by word, life by life. And I never looked back. Returning to Keokuk after seeing Charlotte wasn't just a homecoming, it was a reckoning. For decades, I'd carried the weight of what was done to me like a secret stone in my pocket, heavy, always there. And while I had learned how to walk with it, I had never truly let it go. But something about hearing Charlotte say the words I knew, "I let it happen," loosened something inside me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the one who had to be ashamed. Not long after that, I stood in front of my Saturday writing class, a group of girls, no older than I had been when everything fell apart. I looked around the room at the quiet ones, the loud ones, the ones who wrote about boys and dreams and fights with their mothers, and I saw pieces of myself in all of them. That day, I did something I had never done before. I told them the truth. I told them that when I was 13, something happened to me that should never happen to anyone. I told them about being blamed, about being silenced, about being cast out. I didn't give them names, but I gave them honesty. The room went still. Some of the girls cried. One of them, a girl named Rebecca, stood up afterward and hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe. "You made me feel less alone," she whispered. That was when I realized something my story, for all its pain, had power. So I kept telling it. I started small writing essays for local newsletters, speaking at the women's shelter once a month. Then one day, a librarian friend passed my name along to a regional radio show doing a segment on resilience. I shared my story on air, trembling through every word. The phone lines lit up for an hour after the broadcast. Letters started coming in, from women in their 20s, in their 50s, in their 80s. Some said, "Me too." Some said, "I've never told anyone until now." One woman wrote, "I thought I'd take this secret to the grave, but your voice gave me the courage to write this letter." And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore either. I founded a small support group called Second Voice at the library. Just 5 of us at first, sitting in a circle, clutching mugs of tea like life preservers. We didn't always talk. Sometimes we just sat, but we were together. We understood each other's silence. Over the years, the group grew. More chairs, more voices, more healing. By the time I turned 65, I had helped over 200 women share their stories, some publicly, some only within our circle. I watched them transform. I watched them go from hollow to whole. I watched them realize, like I had, that surviving wasn't enough. We deserved to live. Sometimes people ask me why I didn't just move on. Why keep reopening the wound? And I'd tell them because there's always someone still bleeding in silence, and they need to see a light. One spring afternoon, as I was locking up the library after a meeting, a woman approached me. She looked about my age, with kind eyes and silver hair in a braid. "You're Jane Howard, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes." She hesitated. "You saved my daughter." I blinked. "I'm sorry. I don't. She came to one of your talks last year. She'd been carrying something for a long time, wouldn't speak to anyone, but after hearing you, she finally told me what happened, and now she's in therapy. She's getting better." I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. "She says you're the reason she's still here." She reached out and squeezed my hand. That night, I sat on my porch with a blanket over my lap, staring out at the darkening sky. I thought of that girl, of Rebecca, of all the women who sat in silence until someone gave them permission to speak. I thought of 13-year-old me, and for the first time in my life, I whispered aloud, "You made it, sweetheart. You made it all the way home." It was late autumn when I got the call. A nurse from LeClaire Medical Center. Her voice was gentle but efficient. Charlotte Howard had been admitted 2 days prior and passed away peacefully that morning. Lung failure. She hadn't named anyone as her next of kin, only listed my name and number on a worn index card they'd found in her purse. She didn't have much, the nurse said, but she left behind a box. She told us, "If you ever showed up, to give it to you." I didn't cry. I didn't say much of anything. I thanked the nurse and hung up. For the rest of the afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my old tea kettle as it whistled away on the stove. I couldn't decide if I felt relief, grief, or something else entirely. Charlotte had been my sister by blood, yes, but she had also been the beginning of the deepest wound in my life. Her betrayal had shaped me, scarred me, and yet it was also the reason I had become who I was now. 3 days later, I took the train to LeClaire just for a few hours. I didn't go to the funeral home. There was no service, just a cremation order and a nurse with tired eyes handing me a plain cardboard box. Inside, an old photograph of us as children, 2 matching lockets, and a stack of letters all addressed to me, none mailed. The first letter started with Jane. I know I don't deserve this chance, but I wrote anyway. There were 22 letters in all. Some were angry, some defensive. But as the pages went on, the handwriting changed less rigid, more fragile. The final ones were nearly illegible, as if her body had begun to fail while her soul still tried to make amends. She wrote of guilt, of shame, of sleepless nights that stretched into years. She wrote about watching her children grow and wondering if they'd ever forgive her for being a mother with a broken core. She never asked for forgiveness. She only hoped I had found peace. I didn't take the letters home. I walked down to the Mississippi River and sat on the same bench we used to pass on our walks to the old soda shop. The wind was cool but not cruel. I read the last letter one more time. Then, with slow hands, I fed them all to the river. One by one, they floated for a while like tiny boats carrying her sorrow, then sank, swallowed by the same waters that had shaped our childhood. I stood up, shoulders lighter than they had been in decades. I didn't leave LeClaire angry. I didn't leave burdened. I just left, back in Keokuk. I told my writing group the truth, the whole truth, not just about what happened to me at 13, but what came after, how the pain doesn't always end when the people who caused it disappear, how healing isn't a straight line. It's a slow unraveling of the lies we were told, and the ones we told ourselves just to survive. One of the women, a quiet 68-year-old named Lorraine, took my hand and said, "You're free now. Jane, you did it." And for the first time in my life, I believed her. At 78, I sit on my porch each morning with a cup of tea and the sound of birds filling the air. The world is quieter now, gentler, or maybe I've just learned how to breathe differently, deeper, steadier. There are still days when the past visits me, slipping through the cracks of memory like sunlight through old shutters, but I don't fear it anymore. I've made peace with the shadows. I've named them, faced them. And in doing so, I've made room for something I never thought I'd know again. Joy. Not the kind that comes in fireworks or big celebrations, but the quiet kind. The kind you feel when a student in your writing group finally reads her story out loud for the first time, or when a young mother says, "Thank you for helping me believe I'm not broken." That kind of joy, the hard-earned kind, is what I live for now. People often ask me how I survived, but survival was never the end of my story. Reclaiming myself was because for years I lived in a world where my truth was buried under shame, fear, and silence. I let their lies define me. I believed I was too damaged to be loved, too broken to be whole again. But I was wrong. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in pieces through words, through kindness, through time. It came when I realized that what happened to me was not who I was, that I could build a new story from the ruins, that I could become more than a survivor. I could become a guide, a voice, a light for others still walking in the dark. And if you're reading this or listening, wherever you are and you've ever carried something too heavy to speak out loud, let me say this to you now. You are not alone. You are not to blame. You still belong to yourself. It doesn't matter how long it's been. It doesn't matter who didn't believe you. You still have the right to take up space, to tell your truth, to live a life filled with peace and pride. You are more than what they did to you. You are still here, and that is enough. As for me, I will keep telling my story, not because I want pity, but because I want others to feel what I didn't feel for so long seen. I tell it for the girls who were sent away, for the women who were silenced, and for every soul still learning that healing is not a destination, but a journey walked one brave step at a time. So here is my final truth. Forgiveness is not always necessary. Closure is not always possible, but peace. Peace is always worth pursuing. Thank you for listening to my story. And if it moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or made you feel just a little more whole, I ask this from the bottom of my heart. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Your voice matters. Your experience could be the light someone else is waiting for. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine, stories of survival, of strength, of second chances, please subscribe to the channel. It helps keep these stories alive for those who need them most. From one survivor to another, keep walking. You are never walking alone. Jane Howard.